Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm super excited to be here, at AMSA's mobile conference. I am so excited about the topic today when we're talking about sustaining and supporting peer integration. My presentation will be a little different. I'm going to be speaking about peer integration, but also peers being divested from systems when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I'm just going to get right into it. And so today we're going to talk about how we are not the emergency. And by that I mean the community is not the emergency. The true emergency is the system. Um, I actually revised this entire presentation this morning because just given the climate of everything going on and the immense grief that's happening within my own community and so many others, it just felt really impossible to do a presentation and speak about integration purely in the sense of the existing, quote, behavioral healthcare systems, specifically in the direction they're going underneath this authoritarianism. So I'm going to be using some pretty clear language today. Again, this is just my perspective. There's many other perspectives out there, but the folks I'm looking to reach are more folks like me, folks that have lived experience, people that are interested in working with people with lived experience, and folks that want to build radical, true alternative crisis responses, not just emulations of previous traditional kind of medicalized models and frameworks. So, just a little about me before I start. My name is Nze Okoronta. I use they, them pronouns. I am the executive director of Yarrow Collective as of 1 month ago. I am formerly the director of Solstice House Peer Respite, which is a non-carceral, non-police response crisis alternative space for people navigating distress without the fear of coercion or force. My work is grounded in peer-led, community-based alternatives to crisis response, specifically non-carceral peer respites, warm lines and hotlines that are completely divested from 988 and 911, harm reduction and drug user support, Mad Pride, Mad Liberation, and Mad Mutual Aid, community alternatives to policing, and specifically non-police integrated mobile response teams. I'm not sure for folks in the audience, there may be some people that are, currently working with police or have to connect with police for various reasons. Um, I am always going to speak about moving away from that model and towards something that's purely community based without the use of police. But then I also want to speak about who I am because I'm more than what I do. So who I am is, I like gothy stuff. I love horror movies. I am a studying death worker. I love watercolor painting, ceramics, and I have a pit bull. So a little about me there. I just want to kind of open with a story. So, because I think so much of this work is really technical and very heady, and the pieces of who I am that brought me into this work, specifically pure crisis work, are really a childhood and adulthood that was, I would say, like ravaged by crisis systems. My father is a Nigerian immigrant who was institutionalized, incarcerated, and subsequently deported because of psychiatric emergency. At the time, living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, there were no such thing as mobile crisis responses. Police was the only response. So I grew up with police in my living room. I grew up visiting Mendota Mental Health Institute for years on end. I grew up receiving letters from my father from county jail. And, they told me these things about who he was that really only a crisis system could have labeled him with having things like schizoaffective disorder. And I don't identify with clinical language. I identify I'm a mad person. I do not use language of psychosis or clinicalized or pathology to describe my experience. And what my father was really experiencing was post-Biafran War, Civil War trauma from the Biafran conflict in 1961 that freed Nigeria from British colonization. So I feel like it's especially timely right now when we have Homeland Security, immigration, customs, and enforcement agents sweeping streets and terrorizing communities to think about what crisis in a community manifests as and how a non-police response is completely essential to ending authoritarianism, and ending harm when people are trying to access care, or not trying to access care and are deserving of a caring response when they're in the community. I've used throughout this slideshow, you'll see photos of I have Vincent van Gogh and then also some Alice in Wonderland. These are homages to Mad Pride and Mad Community. Sometimes when I use Vincent van Gogh for a lot of reasons. He's a well-known psychiatric survivor, but also I have a theory that the way that Vincent van Gogh sees at nighttime, maybe he painted the way he saw, because sometimes that's the way my eyes see things, especially when I'm going through something like an extreme or an altered state. These are drawings that my father sent me from Mendota Mental Health Institute. The picture is my mother on the right, and then these flowers and sunrises on the left. He sent me many things, and most of his art was beautiful and inspiring, and he wanted to show me that he was happy. And these are the things I think about um, when I ponder about why we don't have enough mobile crisis, why there isn't truly peer-led crisis response. The lives of people that are still living and breathing and dying and sleeping in institutions every single night. Many of them, their first advent of care could have been a mobile crisis team, or that pattern of harm may have been interrupted had they actually come into contact with a mobile crisis team. So, not to shift really into the heavy stuff right away, but I only have 30 minutes, so I have to be conservative with time. I just want to talk really frankly about mobile crisis, what it is, I guess, in a culture of assessment and liability, what crisis work is, and why mobile crisis has to be different. And in order to look at where mobile crisis should be going, we have to take a look at where we started, where crisis systems are evolving from, and why it's so important to stay away from these things. So when I think about crisis and cultures of assessment and liability, and for context, at one point I actually was a person with lived experience working as a mental health technician at a community mental health organization. And in the wake of the pandemic, they asked me to conduct suicide risk assessments on the Black community after the murder of George Floyd. And these are the things I saw. And these are the reasons I left that work. And um, yeah, I just couldn't do it. So, in what I call cultures of assessment and liability, crisis must be prevented and de-escalated. So it's already a problem. We believe the person has to have a valid and sensible cause. It's analyzed. We also militarize folks and say we have to bring in the whole cavalry. And then we're concerned about what people are doing. They're disrupting order, they're increasing the costs. When during this time, in this day and age, with everything going on, who wouldn't be in crisis is what I really ask. I don't know anyone in my community that is actually doing all right now. Um, there's also this really big fear that the person is going to experience more harm if the crisis doesn't get resolved, and that it must be ended. And not all crisis can be resolved. Some pain cannot be transformed. And I'll talk about that more when we get to things like grief. Um, but I think the most important piece around mobile crisis and why it has to be different is that carcerality truly lives within systems and communities. When I'm speaking about carcerality, I'm not just talking about bringing a police to an interaction who has a gun and putting someone in jail. Carcerality looks like so many other things. It looks like unmet human needs continuing to be ignored, social intolerance, ableism, and fear. We're experiencing so much of that right now with the onslaught of hatred towards transgender and non-binary people, with fears being stoked around immigrant communities, with people essentially being disappeared and disabled people having their human rights and human needs stripped away from them on a daily basis. We've seen the mass defunding of non-police and community-based responses. We've also seen surveillance and privacy and data sharing laws, things that bring up really concerning aspects, especially with AI being integrated into healthcare, people's data being taken from them without their permission and being applied and cross-shared with other institutions. And then because of that, we're seeing the impact of violence and social abandonment. I don't know how many millions of people have lost Medicaid already this year. And what is our response to that? But the expansion of coercive models like AOT. And I'm going to be real about assertive outpatient treatment, things that are called diversion, TAD expansion. Um, doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum that you fall on, these are deliberate acts of trying to force people into specific behaviors and especially taking away support from folks that use drugs, people that are unhoused. This is only going to get worse. And so I think about the things that give me hope are where we started, what how peer support came to be. And if you're a person with lived experience working in mobile crisis or you want to work with people that have lived experience, part of that acknowledgement is knowing that none of us really got into this work because we sought it out. Many of us got into this work because we found ourselves here or were disadvantaged by a system. So originally, this is a photo just from 2009. This isn't even that long ago. You'll see people saying housing, not Haldol. How are we back here? This says don't mess with my brain. Psychiatry, outdated science. Um, I saw another one that said I'm a person, not a puzzle. And so what I identify with strongly when I look at how to do this work is being a psychiatric survivor, someone that's experienced harm by psychiatric systems. Understanding that disability rights is crucial, especially with the violence being done to disabled people right now, disabled, unhoused, chronically ill people of all different backgrounds, and knowing that we are going to if mobile crisis and other things don't start standing up for what we believe in, we're going to need to have another resurgence of this CSX, this consumer survivor ex-patient movement. I mean, I see more solidarity with prison abolition and civil and human rights groups than sometimes I see in peer support. And this question is always like, why? Where is the co-optation coming from? Where is the fear coming from? The people that I serve at the Peer Respite and the people I support are people who are psychiatric survivors, have experienced trauma, who are going through violence, people with disabilities, folks who use drugs, folks without housing, and they're folks that don't find systems helpful in the moment. And even now, there's less and less help available within these systems when the resources are being stripped away. And so we have our communities experiencing crisis, emotional distress, social upheaval, life-interrupting events, grief, pain, loss. Some folks like me and many people I know and love, perceptual differences. That's what I call them. It's madness, hearing voices, seeing visions, having spiritual experience, and also overwhelming exhaustion and losses of trust and control. And so it's so important to maintain mobile crisis and incorporate peer support. But for me, preferably a fully peer-led crisis response is what I'm accustomed to working in. And it's important because of these reasons, because there is a difference, there is a distinction. Clinical models are here to offer help, and non-clinical models are here to offer community and solidarity. And in a clinical sense, too, we're trying to elicit change and we're setting and reaching goals. But when I'm working with another person with lived experience, it's about trust and choice and advocacy. And right now, with the tremendous pressure that's on so many people I know and love, it's exhausting just to get out of bed every morning, much less make these seismic life changes. And with a government that has very clear agendas about what behaviors are and aren't okay, the most important thing we can do is offer people a space of trust and a space of being fully empowered in their own choices. Um, I also think that this is just so relevant because this whole thing, make America healthy again, I'm just going to say this, like it's based on solving a problem. Like we are people, not problems. We're communities, not problems. And so what peer support in mobile crisis, or preferably for me, peer-led crisis response, means allowing people to have a self-defined meaning of themselves, a self-determined experience of themselves in the community. Not everyone wants to have housing. Not everyone wants to be sober. Not everyone wants to be a citizen of this country. And they deserve to exist freely and without threat of harm. So when I think about the importance of peer-led crisis response or peer supporters in a crisis is this promise of collectivism, of community does not mean harmony. It doesn't mean we're all the same. It means that we are all existing together as one and we're leaning on each other for solidarity in times of need. And so what's possible in mobile crisis? Because I think everyone says, well, why would I just put a peer in mobile crisis? The peer's going to get traumatized. The peer can't handle their job. The peer's going to get burned out. Um, there's this kind of belief of incompetency with folks with lived experience that I've seen in the field, not just training, but working with folks of like, how do we bring on these individuals? And the point I think is allowing peer support to do what it's supposed to do. And then the caveat is there's limits to what support can offer. In the pandemic, we had this huge surge of peer support, and it was really important that everyone get the support they need, because the main challenge we were going through was isolation and loneliness. And now, when we're having onslaughts of attacks and lack of personal health needs and lack of and community fragmentation, what's really important is that we have also a sense of mutual aid and resource navigation and community care. Because as a peer, I can offer support and I can advocate and I can build relationships. But if at the end of the day, someone needs access to something like housing or medical supplies, or they have an untreated chronic condition, this is where that what people call integration, what I would call cross collaboration, more like, because integration makes me nervous. Integration without co-optation, I don't know that I've seen it done well yet. Um, I see, this potential for building coalition and alliance within communities, but it has to start with that respect for lived experience, for what's possible with lived experience. And, mobile crises, the reason they have to be different for me is there is a lot of renaming things. There's a lot of, this is a diversion, this is an alternative. I'm seeing things like pure crisis respites, crisis hostels, even crisis hotlines, crisis warm lines. Everyone's using the same language. And the scary thing is, we have no idea who's actually connected to police. And we have no idea where that data is going. And when they're not connected to police, sometimes they're connected to clinicians who respond like police, which is actually no better. Um, and arguably it's worse because it's less transparent. So when we have peer support embedded within mobile crisis, and preferably for me, peer-led crisis response teams, and I've seen it and it can be done, what we actually get is accessibility for all. We get care that is ex care that's experientially different, care that comes without threat, without fear. I will be honest, as a person with lived experience myself, unless I know someone personally or I'm given a direct recommendation, I will never access a peer support service myself because so many of them are interlaced within policing systems. And so many of them are connected to clinical supervision that responds like police. And so it's really no different. And I'm saying that as someone that's worked from within that field for the last 5 or 6 years. And that's very sad. Um, when mobile crisis is different, when peer support's different, we're also preventing these losses of power. These are some of the reasons why so many folks I even know won't go to peer support because they say, well, it's peer support, but that if I don't do what they want, they're going to call the police on me, or they're going to report it to my probation officer. Or if I talk about suicide and self-harm, they have to field it up to a supervisor, and then I end up with a police officer at my door. That can't be what mobile crisis is. If we're not promoting self-advocacy and liberating people from harm, then we're not doing the work. And for me, mobile crisis doesn't just end at responding to someone at the street level. It's after they've ended up in the institution, after they've been put on a crisis hold, if that's something that has occurred, it's supporting them through that and after that. And sometimes it's Operation Get People Out of the Psych Ward, honestly. I think there's such a huge limitation to what mobile crisis does when the interaction is simply ended at, well, we did everything we could and now they have to work with this other entity because we don't have autonomy to end the interaction by ourselves. And sadly, that's the case in a lot of states. So the questions that I'm kind of leaving with that I'm asking people to think about is like, what's the future of alternatives? Is there one? What does an alternative mean now? When even like saying certain words can get your entire program defunded. Um, do you stay in the work and, risk being co-opted? Do you fight for what's really right and stand up for the needs of the community? Or do we watch this like gradual language shift and this co-optation happen? And then when people in the community are navigating distress, they really don't know where to go. They don't know where it's safe to call. They don't know who it's safe to lean on. Um, every interaction we have that incorporates a police response or incorporates a clinical response that behaves like a police officer is a break in trust. And word travels fast, and people deserve to know. So it's like, what are we really fighting for? I ask myself this every day. It's really easy to get comfortable in a nonprofit, in a 501(c)(3) and just say, well, I'm doing the good work. I'll wait till the administration passes, and then in 5 years, we'll go back to the way things were. That's not good enough for me, actually. I actually just left a state because they were sliding so far backward in peer support and in crisis work. And it became untenable for me. And I actually don't think I would stay in this work if I couldn't do it justice. That's just part of my own integrity. What I'm fighting for is fully peer-led crisis response, not just integrated. And I know, that's kind of the first step is let's integrate, integration is such a hot word. But just like with clinical integration, there have been so many challenges and so many stumbling blocks and so many problems. Some of the best work I've seen is actually because people completely divested from the medical model, from that clinical model, built their own peer-led responses in crises, and then those models came circling back 5 years later and said, "Can we pay you?" or like, "How are you doing this?" Um, I'm also fighting for like direct lived experience only because I've seen a lot of scary stuff lately, like a hybrid lived experience, secondhand lived experience, family members counted as having lived experience. That is not direct lived experience, especially in a crisis context. There's a difference between being an ally and being an actual person with lived experience. So when I say peers in mobile crisis, I mean people with direct lived experience of survivorship by psychiatric systems or harm by behavioral health systems. I do not mean people that love someone that has a mental health concern. I don't even have anything to say about that. Um, I'm also fighting for autonomous interactions, the ability to end a call without having to loop in police or end a call without having to transfer to police. And that takes community buy-in. That takes communities saying, we want this, we believe this works. This takes sometimes you gathering constituents. It might take local city government. It might take common council meetings. It might be in the form of, we had a police oversight board. What we really want is trust and means and space to do the work. And emphasis on means, because if you're not funded, that's really challenging. Um, but that's what I think is really worth fighting for. And so as I kind of close out here, I'm just thinking about, again, like want to honor this time that we're in when there's so many people who are feeling endangered, people that we love and care about. Every person who has disappeared is a family member, a friend, a loved one, a community member who's touched someone's lives. And if mobile crisis doesn't live up to its promise, it simply becomes an instrument to an authoritarian regime. And it actually waters down our practice. Our skills become less. And then we lose touch with what peer support was supposed to do in the first place, which is liberate from harm, um, and support in the wake of systemic abandonment. So the small things, if building a mobile crisis team or like living up to some of these things isn't within your direct reach, some everyday things you could do or some small steps are just learning your rights, learning your rights when it comes to crisis interactions and raising consciousness in your community, showing up in crisis without calling the police. That's and I think that's teaching other people to do the same thing if it's not accessible to them. Supporting people who use drugs unequivocally, addressing our own internalized depression, trusting communities to know what we need, defending one another in the face of communal and systemic harm, and holding each other accountable and saying, hey, like talking about co-optation when it's real. So here is a lovely quote from Adrienne Marie Brown that I'll end with. It's a science fiction is simply a way to practice the future together. That's what many of you are up to, practicing futures, practicing justice, and living into new stories. It is our right and responsibility to create a new world. Yeah. Thank you so much.